I've seen wild animals fight for survival in the wilderness, but nothing prepared me for the sound that shattered my soul that morning. 2 horses screaming, not whinnying, screaming, as if their throats had been lit on fire. I dropped the feed bucket, sprinted through the gravel path like a man possessed, and burst into the barn just in time to see both of them collapse. Right there, just feet from the stalls I'd built with my own hand. And standing in the middle of it all, smug and calm as a statue, was Karen from the HOA, holding her phone and smiling like she'd won a prize at the county fair. For a moment I thought I might have blacked out. The metallic stench of blood mixed with something sweet and rotten in the air, hay scattered across the floor like shredded paper, and 2 of my rescue horses, mustangs I'd fought to save from an illegal auction, were twitching on the ground in violent spasms. Karen didn't look scared. She looked proud. That's when she said it. "You should have followed the rules, sweetie. This is a residential community, not a petting zoo." She held up her clipboard with a pre-filled HOA citation and casually began recording a video like she was documenting a nuisance removal. I stepped forward and she stepped back, pretending to be frightened. "Don't touch me or I'll call the police," she warned, dialing her phone with the same hand that had probably scattered the poison feed. The paramedics came first. One of them recognized me and tried to be professional. "Agent McAllister?" he asked quietly, unsure if he was supposed to call me that around civilians. I nodded but didn't speak. My throat was tight. I'd been in covert wildlife raids where smugglers shot at us from behind cages full of dying creatures, but this was my home. These animals were under federal protection. And that's when the floodgate cracked. I told them not to move the bodies until I got photos, then called in animal control and wildlife enforcement. Karen, meanwhile, pranced around to the neighbors claiming I had zoo animals, and that she had to act for the good of the community. Her crocodile tears dried up the moment I clipped my badge to my vest. She went pale. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just pointed to the fallen horses and said, "You just committed a federal crime." Karen tried to pivot, of course. Claimed it was an accident. Claimed she saw one of the horses, foaming at the mouth, and panicked. Her story kept changing. But what didn't change was the evidence. The hay had traces of clenbuterol, an illegal steroid cocktail often used to fatten livestock before black market butchering. You don't find that kind of poison in your average gardening shed. Someone brought it here on purpose. Someone who thought 2 lives could be erased for the sake of silence and a cleaner neighborhood. I walked the perimeter of my property that evening, reliving every moment I'd spent with those horses. I remembered when I'd pulled them out of a mud pit at the edge of the Nevada border. Skinny, abused, barely breathing. I'd brought them here to recover. To be free. They didn't deserve this. I'd faced smugglers in Central America, poachers in Alaska, even corrupt park officials in Arizona. But not once had I thought the most vicious threat would wear a pastel pink tracksuit and live 2 doors down with a poodle named Muffin. Later that night, after the sun sank behind the hills, Animal Control gave me the first hint that things weren't what they seemed. The officer leaned in quietly and whispered, "This wasn't a one-off. I've been seeing cases like this in 2 other neighborhoods. Same setup. HOA complaints followed by mysterious animal death. But this one. This is the first where someone slipped up." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen staring at the barn security footage, frame by frame. At 3:42 a.m., a figure wearing a hoodie slipped through the side gate, someone familiar with the layout. They scattered feed from a bucket they brought with them. By 4:10 a.m., they were gone. At 6:17 a.m., Karen entered the barn with her clipboard and coffee cup. She didn't flinch when she saw the animals convulsing. That's not how someone reacts to a surprise. That's how someone confirms a result. The next morning, I made a call. A quiet one. Not to local police. To the office of Deputy Director Barnes, Wildlife Crimes Division. He owed me a favor. 3 years ago, I helped his niece escape a trafficking ring in Idaho that used animal auctions as a front. He didn't ask questions when I said, I've got a situation. And I think it's bigger than one HOA gone rogue. Karen didn't know it, but she'd just declared war on the wrong man. I wasn't just a horse lover with a backyard barn. I was a federal agent with a full clearance level, a ranch wired with surveillance drones, and friends in places where animal smugglers go to disappear. And I was about to burn her empire down without lighting a single match. Before the week ended, she'd wish she'd stuck to baking muffins for HOA meetings instead of poisoning federally protected wildlife. She thought she was above the rules. But the rules were mine to write. And she had just stepped into a hornet's nest where every sting came with a badge. The news broke locally first. 2 horses found dead at local ranch amid HOA dispute. But they didn't know the half of it. Behind that simple headline was a web of lies, cruelty, and an under-the-radar network that was about to get ripped out by the root. All it needed was the right man, with the right badge, and one last push. And I just loaded the first bullet. The day after the incident, the air around my ranch felt different. Still quiet. But not peaceful, the kind of quiet that creeps under your skin like a warning. I kept checking over my shoulder, not because I was scared, but because I knew the enemy hadn't retreated. She was plotting her next move. Karen wasn't the type to fold. She was the type to double down, especially when her ego was bruised. And right now, her entire identity as queen of the cul-de-sac was in jeopardy. The federal agents were inbound, and her name was about to be on a very different kind of list than her precious HOA meeting sign-up sheet. I started combing through everything: documents, emails, HOA newsletters, even neighborhood group chat. And the more I looked, the more I realized Karen had been laying the groundwork for months. She'd been pushing to redefine zoning codes within our community to restrict non-traditional pets, a phrase vague enough to give her the power to pick and choose targets. My horses were just the latest. Before them, it was a woman with therapy goats, then a guy with exotic parrots. The pattern was obvious. Karen wasn't just enforcing policy, she was clearing the field. And if what animal control said was true, this wasn't isolated. It was part of something bigger. I went back through my security system and ran facial recognition on the figure that entered the barn. The hoodie had concealed most of their identity, but not everything. The gate camera, angled high for better perimeter vision, caught the face just briefly. Male, late 40s, long face, faint scar on the chin. I didn't recognize him, but the software flagged a potential match. Dale Harwin, former veterinarian license holder, banned 3 years ago for falsifying animal health certificates across state lines. The kicker? His last known employment was at a mobile petting zoo that got raided in connection with exotic animal trafficking. I pulled up the case file. Buried deep in the notes was a curious mention. Employee claimed HOA member funneled animals through suburban properties under guise of rehoming. That's when the puzzle started clicking. Karen didn't kill my horses out of spite alone. She was trying to eliminate witnesses. Those Mustangs were tagged for observation. They'd been illegally sold at a fake auction run by a front company. The same company was connected to a seized shipment of endangered hybrids last year. We thought the trail went cold. Turns out, it went straight to Karen's neighborhood. And my ranch just happened to be in the way. I called in reinforcements, not uniforms, not yet. Friends. Quiet ones. Wildlife enforcement techs arrived in an unmarked van that night and set up surveillance drones, soil sensors, and thermal motion detectors around Karen's property. We weren't waiting for her to make another move. We were going to catch her mid-step. The first breakthrough came 48 hours later. A heat signature around 3 a.m. showed movement in her backyard. One of the techs, Abby, zoomed in with a drone camera. Karen was standing next to her garden shed in a robe, smoking a cigarette, talking to someone behind the shed. The voice was muffled, but a second figure emerged, our mystery man with the scar. They moved a large crate wrapped in a tarp toward a beat-up trailer and loaded it into the back. I enhanced the audio, slowed it down, and heard the man say, "This one better sell better than the last 2. The crate shifted. Something inside let out a weak neigh. I had to restrain myself from charging down there that instant. But protocol mattered. We needed more. Enough for a federal warrant. So I called Deputy Director Barnes and sent the footage. By morning, we had an emergency court order and an active surveillance warrant. Karen's precious property had just become ground zero in a federal investigation. And she had no idea. Meanwhile, Karen was doing what Karens do, doubling down on her facade. She started a campaign to have me evicted from the neighborhood, citing unauthorized livestock, public safety concerns, and intimidating behavior. She handed out printed flyers, hosted a coffee and complaints meetup at her house, and tried to rally the board into forcing a vote. The HOA board, to their credit, seemed wary. Maybe because I'd quietly informed them that any attempt to enforce action against me would be considered obstruction in an ongoing federal probe. Karen didn't like that one bit. That evening, one of the wildlife agents flagged something strange. Karen's home internet router was pinging a private server registered to an animal export company based in Florida. The company had been dormant for 2 years, but our internal files showed it was a suspected shell business used to falsify animal origin record. More suspicious? The data packets weren't just outgoing, they were downloading updated certification forms. It looked like Karen was preparing new papers. For what, we weren't sure. But time was ticking. Just after midnight, a neighbor knocked on my door. It was Janice, a retired schoolteacher who'd always kept her distance from HOA drama. But now she was scared. She whispered that she'd seen Karen dragging something out of her garage late at night. Something with legs. She didn't want to get involved, but she said it didn't look like trash or gardening supplies. It looked alive. And it wasn't the first time. I thanked her, handed her a burner phone, and told her to text me if she saw anything else. The next morning, Karen was out watering her lawn like nothing had happened, sipping from her coffee mug that said, "Queen of Everything." But I could see the tightness in her posture, the glances over her shoulder. She knew she was being watched. She just didn't know by whom. Then came the twist I didn't expect. I was reviewing the drone feed from the night before, scanning for movement patterns, when something caught my eye, not on Karen's property, but the HOA office itself. A late-night visitor. Male, well-dressed, pulled up in a matte black SUV with no plate. He entered the back door using a key and emerged 20 minutes later with a locked case. The SUV matched a model used by an exotic transport ring we busted 2 years ago in Montana. I called it in. Suddenly, the focus wasn't just on Karen. It was on the HOA itself. And how many people were willing to cover up the kind of filth that couldn't be washed off with neighborhood rules and a coat of suburban politeness? The real operation wasn't just Karen's animal-hating vendetta. It was a network. Hidden behind HOA gates, neighborhood bylaws, and homeowner compliance letters. A perfect cover. Who questions the people enforcing the rules, especially when they say they're just trying to keep the community clean? But I wasn't just another neighbor. I wasn't just another target. I was a federal agent, and I had just stepped into the dirtiest, most vile ring of suburban wildlife trafficking this side of the Mississippi. And this time, I wasn't leaving without dragging every last one of them into the light. I spent the next morning pacing the gravel path along the barn, replaying the footage from Karen's shed and the HOA office in my mind like a crime scene carousel that wouldn't stop spinning. It wasn't just Karen anymore. The scale of this thing had ballooned overnight. We weren't just dealing with one HOA president with a personal vendetta, we were up against an organized ring hiding behind the clean white fences of suburbia. That locked case pulled from the HOA building? It had to be important. It was too deliberate, too careful. And if it matched what we suspected, black market transfer records, buyer logs, maybe even transport routes, then it could crack the whole thing wide open. That meant it was time to stop playing defense. I contacted Barnes and requested clearance to initiate a soft sting. I didn't want a full takedown yet. We needed Karen to lead us to her buyers. If she got scared off now, she'd vanish into the same shadows she'd slithered out from. But if we let her think the heat had cooled off, she'd keep operating. She needed to believe I was distracted, buried in red tape, and just barely hanging on to my ranch. So I started acting like it. That afternoon, I intentionally argued with 2 HOA board members in public. Loudly. I made sure Karen saw me throw my arms up and storm away from the meeting gazebo like a frustrated man about to give up. I even left my barn gate half open and had one of the wildlife agents pose as a building inspector posting a fake, non-compliance notice. Karen fell for it like a moth to a back porch light. That evening, she strutted down the road like she'd just won an HOA award for best sabotage. But the real trap was already being laid. I had a tech crew install microcameras in the tree line facing her backyard, 2 audio recorders hidden inside the HOA community board signs, and thermal imaging on the route leading out of the neighborhood. We knew they were planning a shipment. The encrypted data from her router pointed to a large file scheduled for secure upload within the next 48 hours. That usually meant digital paperwork for a high-value animal sale. We just had to find out where the animal was, and where she planned to move it. While the equipment was being finalized, I went undercover. It wasn't the first time I'd done it. I'd posed as everything from a bored oil tycoon to a washed-up circus trainer over the years, but this time I went with something simpler. A disgraced exotic breeder looking to sell off rare stock fast, no questions asked. A friend from the DEA helped forge the background. A fake alias, burner phone, a spotless but phony history of selling wild hybrids under the table. The bait was perfect. We leaked word to one of Karen's suspected contacts, an animal handler named Travis Maddox, known for dealing in illegal crossbreed. Within 12 hours, he reached out to my alias asking for pictures. I sent over staged images of a rare foal tagged as a wild zebra horse mix. It was fake, of course, but flashy enough to tempt someone used to making a profit off novelty. Maddox bit. "Can you deliver discreetly?" he asked. "Client hates exposure." That client was Karen. We were sure of it. I agreed to meet in a field just outside the HOA community, a place that looked quiet but was perfect for surveillance. Maddox sent a confirmation. "Saturday. Early. Cash. Bring the foal. She'll meet you directly." That told us everything we needed to know. Karen wasn't just connected, she was the middlewoman for active, in-person transfers. Saturday came fast. My crew set up at dawn, drones in the air, cars hidden behind tree lines, agents posing as joggers along the trail. I parked my fake livestock trailer at the drop point, opened the back just enough to show the interior staging. No real horse inside. Just a realistic replica, heat signature rigged, covered in hay and mud. I paced like a seller getting nervous, checked my watch, looked around. Karen arrived exactly on time. And she didn't come alone. She stepped out of a champagne-colored SUV dressed like she was going to a garden party. Big sunglasses, matching gloves, even pearls. If someone took a photo, they'd never suspect she was there to commit a federal crime. Behind her, 2 men followed. One of them was Maddox, the other looked ex-military. Big build, cropped haircut, scanning the area like he expected trouble. Karen came right up to me and smiled. "You must be Victor," she said. That was the alias. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Travis said you had something unique." I nodded, opened the back door of the trailer fully. She peeked inside, took one long look, then turned to Maddox and nodded. "We'll take it." Loaded into my truck. Same spot as before. Those words confirmed it. This wasn't her first transaction. She had a system. A route. Probably storage. Maddox climbed into the trailer, opened the fake compartment to check for tracking devices. I played dumb and fumbled with paperwork, acting nervous. Karen leaned in and whispered, "This will shut that mouthy cowboy up for good. HOA doesn't need barn trash like him." That was it. The line. The final nail. I tapped the comm hidden under my collar. The agents moved in so fast that Maddox barely had time to react. One came from the trail, another from behind her SUV, and the rest swooped in via drone lock. Karen screamed and tried to run, tripping over her own heels as she clawed at the field grass. Maddox pulled a pocket knife, but he was dropped by a taser in less than 2 seconds. The third man tried to fight. He didn't make it 10 steps. Karen was on the ground shrieking about rights, property laws, harassment. "You people are ruining my HOA," she screamed, flailing. I walked up to her slowly, calmly, as she was being cuffed. "Federal Wildlife Enforcement," I said, flashing my badge. "You poisoned protected animals, trafficked illegal hybrids, falsified transport documents, and sold animals across state lines. You're done." Her mouth opened but no sound came out. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen had nothing to say. They hauled her off along with the others. A full mobile forensics team arrived minutes later to inspect her SUV. Hidden inside the back seat paneling were 5 microchip tags linked to animals that had gone missing from sanctuaries across 3 states. One of them matched a foal I'd helped rescue last year. I stood still for a moment, eyes fixed on the open field where she had planned to erase another life. This wasn't just justice. This was personal. And it was only the beginning. Because as it turns out, Karen wasn't the only HOA president running cover for this operation. There were more. And now that the dam had cracked, the whole thing was about to flood. Karen's arrest was a victory, but it wasn't the finish line. It was more like discovering the first termite in a wall that looked fine on the outside. By the time she was being loaded into the back of the black SUV, her HOA board contacts were already panicking. One of the junior members, an older man named Lewis with a fondness for gin and loose talk, showed up at my gate the next morning, clearly rattled. He asked if we could chat like gentlemen. I offered him a cup of coffee and sat him down on my porch. He didn't even touch the mug. Just sat there trembling, eyes scanning the treetops, like he was expecting to get sniped by someone in gardening gloves. And what he told me next took this from criminal to conspiracy. Karen hadn't just been operating alone with a few rogue associates. She had been part of a loosely tied network of HOA enforcers who traded in confiscated or surrendered animals under the radar. Most of it was subtle: pet rehoming through bogus notices, surprise inspections to confiscate illegal animals, even HOA bylaws rewritten just enough to trigger forced removal. The animals would disappear. Members were told they'd been taken to local shelters or humane societies. But as Lewis revealed, they were instead sold to private collectors or black market buyers. He hadn't thought much of it at first. He claimed he believed Karen's spin, until she'd asked him to help doctor a euthanasia report for a miniature horse he'd actually seen alive the day before. That was his breaking point. Lewis had access to documents, minutes from hidden meetings, email chains buried in personal inboxes, encrypted spreadsheets tracking which communities had been cleaned and when. He brought me a thumb drive and swore it was everything he had. "I'm not proud of what I let happen," he said quietly. "But I'm not going to jail for a woman who once fined me for painting my fence off-white." That night, I sent the drive to Barnes, and within 12 hours, we had confirmation that the rabbit hole went deeper than we imagined. 3 HOA communities in the region had similar cases of sudden animal disappearances after compliance sweeps. One of them had fined a man for raising rabbits, then claimed the animals had to be surrendered due to improper enclosure. Not a single rabbit ever made it to the shelter they listed in the paperwork. A quick check revealed the shelter didn't even exist. It had closed down 2 years earlier, but the name was still used in falsified records. And it got worse. That same phantom shelter name showed up in Karen's printed documents, at least 17 times. I knew what came next had to be surgical. One wrong move and the network would scatter. We needed a high-value target to bait out the rest. That opportunity arrived in the form of a man named Everett Cole, an HOA consultant who specialized in compliance training. On the surface, he seemed like just another clipboard-carrying enabler, but inside the files Lewis gave us was something odd. Everett had been paid consultation fees from each of the flagged communities, always in even increments, always just under the IRS reporting limit. He wasn't just consulting, he was coordinating. We tracked his vehicle, a dark green Range Rover with a custom plate that read Enforce 1. It didn't take long to see the pattern. He'd visit an HOA board meeting, disappear into private discussions, and then within a week, a local animal owner would get cited. 1 month later, the animals would be relocated or surrendered. Another 2 weeks, and a sale report would ping on a black market tracker we used to monitor online illegal animal auctions. Cole never handled the animals directly. He didn't have to. He designed the policy, signed the papers, and moved on before the fallout. I arranged to run into him at a community planning event hosted by the County Zoning Commission. He didn't recognize me, probably mistook me for a local rancher or some conservationist trying to push back on suburban sprawl. That was fine. I introduced myself under my alias and said I was looking for help with enforcement training to clear my community of problem livestock. His eyes lit up the moment I said the word problem. He handed me his card, offered me a private consultation, and even promised he could get things processed faster than official channels. We set the meeting for a Friday afternoon, in a vacant community clubhouse that had been rigged with both audio and video surveillance. I posed as a nervous HOA president in a community struggling with nuisance animals, and Everett did exactly what we predicted. He brought in paperwork templates, offered pre-written citations, and even had a checklist for how to encourage quick surrenders by threatening liens or escalating fines. He was confident, smug, completely unaware that everything he was saying was being transmitted directly to a federal command vehicle parked 4 blocks away. Then came the moment that confirmed it all. He pulled out a laminated sheet, a fake document stamped with the name of the non-existent shelter. "We use this when owners get suspicious," he said, tapping it with his pen. "If they try to verify, the number just redirects to a voicemail. It's clean, it's quiet, and no one ever follows up." I leaned forward, trying not to grit my teeth. "And what happens to the animals?" He grinned. "Let's just say they end up with people who appreciate the finer things. We don't waste them." That was it. We had him. When the agents entered, he stood up in shock, mouth flapping open like he couldn't decide whether to yell or run. He tried to talk his way out of it, said he was joking, that he was being dramatic for effect. Then he claimed I was entrapping him. But by the time he realized the room was fully wired, it was already over. They took him into custody, seized his laptop, phone, and all the materials in his vehicle. What we found on that laptop was staggering. A full operational map, listing HOA communities across 5 states where similar operations had either been initiated or proposed. Every site had a checklist of targets, residents with animals deemed unfavorable, timelines for citation, removal, and transfer. They had projected income estimates based on breed rarity. These people weren't enforcing property values. They were running an animal laundering empire. By Sunday, 12 more warrants had been issued. And Karen? She was still sitting in county jail, now realizing she wasn't going to be bailed out anytime soon. Her attorney tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but with each passing day, more people flipped. More documents came in. And more dots connected. What started with the death of 2 rescue horses had uncovered a criminal ring embedded deep inside the very institutions meant to keep neighborhoods safe. It wasn't just about property lines and bylaws anymore. It was about exposing the rot hiding behind flower beds and neighborhood watch signs. And we were far from done. By the time the sun rose over my ranch that final morning, the air felt different. Lighter. Not because the fight was over, far from it, but because for the first time in months, I knew the monsters weren't hiding in plain sight anymore. They were boxed in, stripped of their clipboards and name tags, no longer protected by bylaws or community vote counts. Karen's smug voice, once echoing through HOA meetings and complaint letters, had been reduced to a single pathetic headline in the morning paper. Local HOA president faces federal indictment in animal trafficking sting. Her mugshot, dazed and tear-streaked, stared up from the page like a woman who couldn't quite believe her empire had collapsed because someone actually fought back. The charges were long and thorough: wildlife trafficking, conspiracy, falsifying legal documents, cruelty to animals, obstruction of justice, impersonation of regulatory officials. Karen's little clipboard act had become her undoing, and the beauty of it all was that she'd built her own paper trail. Every citation she filed, every phony animal removal form she signed, every forged complaint she weaponized against pet owners in the neighborhood, it was all collected, stacked, cross-referenced, and handed over in binders thicker than her precious HOA rulebook. But she wasn't the only one going down. Everett Cole's arrest broke the network wide open. His files led to 3 more consultants, 6 other HOA presidents, and over 24 individuals across 5 states who'd quietly participated in the forced removal and illegal resale of animals. Some had already fled, but not fast enough. When federal agents are motivated, they don't knock twice. The raids came at dawn, swift and clinical. Uniformed agents carted off boxes of evidence, hauled away desktop computers, even uncovered a hidden transport truck full of tranquilized animals in a backyard garage. People who once bragged about lawn uniformity and fence height were suddenly pleading ignorance from the back of police vans. Karen tried to play the victim in her initial court appearance. Her attorney painted her as a misunderstood civic leader, someone who cared too much about neighborhood safety and was manipulated by unscrupulous consultants. But the courtroom had already seen the footage. Her voice was crystal clear in the surveillance videos, discussing prices, mocking pet owners, and casually suggesting euthanasia for animals she called aesthetic eyesores. No jury was going to buy her victim act, and neither was the judge, who denied her bail and reminded the court that her actions directly led to the death of 2 federally protected horses. Back on my ranch, the recovery began. The remaining Mustangs were returned from temporary holding facilities, and they weren't alone. Dozens of animals that had been stolen, mistreated, or scheduled for illegal shipment were now under federal custody. Some were too damaged, too afraid of people, but others began to trust again. I converted one of my barns into a rehabilitation center. Volunteers arrived, former victims of HOA abuse, young activists, even a few teenagers from the local high school who had followed the case online and wanted to help. Word had spread far beyond the neighborhood. My inbox overflowed with messages. Some were from ranchers who'd experienced similar attacks. Others were from whistleblowers looking to do the right thing. A few were just people who'd lost faith in their HOAs and wanted to thank someone for standing up. One day, a documentary crew showed up unannounced. A major platform had picked up the story. They wanted to tell the full tale, how an entitled suburban tyrant had been taken down not by violence, not by revenge, but by the steady hand of the very law she thought she could twist to her advantage. They filmed everything: interviews, reenactments, drone footage of the stings, close-ups of the horse's recovery. The producers called it Pasture of Justice. I hated the title, but I agreed to help. Not for fame, but for awareness. People needed to know how deep this rot had spread. Karen's trial was set 6 months later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Her once supportive neighbors sat quietly, eyes down, embarrassed. She looked tired. Older. Her signature pink blazer replaced by a drab prison jumpsuit. As the prosecution laid out their evidence, hours of footage, bank records, veterinary forgeries, witness testimony from her own board members, Karen shrank deeper into her chair. When the footage of her mocking the death of my horses played, the entire room went silent. It wasn't just about the crime anymore. It was about the cruelty, the indifference, the way she treated living creatures like clutter to be cleaned up. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, Karen didn't even react. Maybe she thought she'd beat the system. Maybe she thought her neighborhood charm would carry her through. But now, she was just another inmate with a number. Sentenced to 20 years, no parole for the first 12, with additional penalties pending restitution and federal violations. She would spend her best years surrounded by cold concrete and locked doors, the only animals nearby being federal facility guard dogs that didn't care about property values or flowerbed alignment. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse. A light breeze rolled in, carrying the scent of pine and summer dust. Reporters tried to rush me for a statement. I gave them one line. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. Turns out, she was destroying its soul. And that was it. I went home. The ranch grew in the months that followed. I received federal approval to expand the property into a certified wildlife recovery site. Grants came through. Partnerships were formed. We started hosting educational tours, inviting local schools, veterans with PTSD, and even ex-HOA residents seeking healing. The horses flourished. One mare gave birth to a foal we named Liberty. She had the same streak of fire in her eyes as the ones we lost. Every now and then, I'd catch sight of the wooden board I'd staked outside the barn after that first horrific night. I never took it down. It read, in bold red paint, "Now you're on the endangered list." It was a message. Not to Karen anymore, she was gone. But to anyone who thought they could erase life in the name of order. This ranch was more than land now. It was a line. And if they ever came for it again, they'd find out just how deep the roots of justice had grown.